Bienvenidos al auditorio Sonia Fajardo Forero, nuestro lugar en la Konrad Lorenz para la academia, el arte, la cultura y el intercambio civilizado de las ideas. Este auditorio cuenta con 4 salidas de emergencia ubicadas a ambos lados del escenario, tanto en el primer como segundo piso. En caso de ser necesaria una evacuación, siga las instrucciones del personal de logística y diríjase al punto de encuentro ubicado a la salida de este edificio por el costado oriental. El uso de celulares y otros aparatos electrónicos durante el evento es molesto para las personas que están sobre el escenario y también para las personas que se encuentran a nuestro lado en la sala. Para poder mantener este lugar en perfecto estado y que usted lo pueda disfrutar, es muy importante abstenerse de consumir alimentos y bebidas. Bienvenidos.
Buenas tardes para todas y todos, ¿cómo están? Bueno, nos encontramos, como lo hemos venido anunciando en redes, por correo electrónico desde hace varias semanas, en este evento que hemos venido esperando y que la institución ha venido planeando desde el inicio de este año y que hoy por fin en esta semana se concreta y coincide además con la celebración del Día del Psicólogo. Les doy buenas tardes y la bienvenida a todas las personas que nos acompañan, a los profesores, investigadores, a ustedes estudiantes por voluntariamente estar acá compartiendo en este espacio. Le damos también la bienvenida a esta jornada, además en la que tenemos el honor de contar con la presencia de un destacado científico, un gran educador y un pionero en el campo de la psicología del aprendizaje, el profesor Michael Domjan. Bienvenido. El profesor Domjan es profesor de psicología en la Universidad de Texas en Austin. Es reconocido internacionalmente por sus valiosas contribuciones a la investigación sobre condicionamiento clásico y el aprendizaje, condicionamiento clásico y operante y el aprendizaje. A lo largo de sus más de 50 años de carrera, ha integrado los conceptos del análisis experimental de la conducta con sus perspectivas evolutivas, especialmente en el contexto de la etología. Su enfoque interdisciplinar ha logrado profundizar en áreas que van desde el condicionamiento pavloviano hasta los procesos conductuales. en comportamientos complejos, ofreciendo nuevos caminos en la comprensión de la conducta animal y humana. A través de sus libros de texto, como Principios del aprendizaje del comportamiento, ha impactado la educación de miles de estudiantes en todo el mundo, convirtiéndose en una figura clave en la enseñanza de la psicología conductual. Incluso durante la pandemia, el profesor Domjan continuó aportando a sus estudiantes mediante una serie de videos educativos que han sido vistos por estudiantes en más de 30 países. Su compromiso con la difusión del conocimiento ha sido incansable y hoy nos honra su presencia y la oportunidad de aprender directamente de sus aportes. Es un privilegio para todos nosotros contar con él en esta ocasión, en la cual nos brindará 2 presentaciones que profundizan en su perspectiva innovadora sobre aprendizaje y conducta. En la primera conferencia que estaremos hoy, titulada The Golden Age of Behaviorism, el Dr. Domjan explorará la evolución histórica del conductismo, su relevancia en la psicología actual, nos va a guiar a través del ascenso sobre lo que se llama la revolución cognitiva y nos va a mostrar cómo, a través también de los avances tecnológicos, el conductismo vuelve a ocupar un papel protagónico en la comprensión de la conducta de animales humanos y no humanos. En esta era de innovación, donde el monitoreo del comportamiento y los algoritmos de inteligencia artificial permiten analizar la conducta en contextos naturales, el profesor Domjan propone que estamos viviendo una nueva era, una edad de oro del conductismo. A lo largo de esta presentación nos va a ayudar también a comprender cómo la tecnología ha permitido profundizar en esos estudios de la conducta y cómo el legado de figuras como Skinner aún siguen vigentes. Mañana, en horas de la mañana, estaremos también nuevamente esperándolos en este mismo espacio para compartir un segundo momento con él, en una segunda charla donde nos ofrecerá una reflexión crítica sobre las contribuciones, los alcances de las contribuciones académicas de Skinner, uno, como todos sabemos acá, uno de los padres del conductismo. El profesor Domjan explicará los puntos fuertes del condicionamiento operante, pero también va a señalar aspectos en los que Skinner, a su juicio, dejó algunos elementos todavía por construir. Nos hablará de la importancia de las asociaciones, de cómo éstas pueden interactuar con el condicionamiento, un fenómeno pues, que ya todos hemos conocido. Esta charla promete ser la oportunidad única para entender las complejidades del aprendizaje y el condicionamiento desde una perspectiva que combina la rigurosidad científica con una profunda comprensión crítica de la teoría conductual. Y para finalizar, quiero mencionarles a todos y dejar también aquí la reflexión sobre la mesa de lo profundamente agradecidos, profesor Domjan, que estamos con su presencia. Los estudiantes que usted ve en este recinto son estudiantes de psicología, de primer, segundo, tercer, cuarto semestre, donde en asignaturas como análisis del comportamiento, donde vemos todo un semestre de condicionamiento clásico, todo un semestre de condicionamiento operante, vamos a trabajar en psicología comparada en los laboratorios de análisis experimental. Hemos aprendido desde los conocimientos de la psicología básica y cómo esta psicología básica tiene un gran impacto en todos los campos aplicados de la psicología. Para todos nosotros debe ser fuente de orgullo también hacer parte de este momento que es histórico no solamente para la Conrad y para nosotros, sino en general para la psicología de Colombia y en nuestro país. Esta misma semana la universidad le ofrecerá una distinción al profesor Domjan como un doctorado honoris causa de la Fundación Universitaria Konrad Lorenz y nos hace sentir todavía más orgulloso que ahora el profesor Domjan no solamente es un referente histórico en la psicología, sino además tiene el mismo apellido que tenemos todos nosotros como conradistas. Bueno, sin más preámbulos, profesor Domjan, bienvenido. Nos acompañará también el profesor Leonardo Ortega como moderador de este espacio. Un aplauso de bienvenida, por favor. Gracias.
Muy buenas tardes. Nuevamente una gran bienvenida al profesor Domjan. Para aquellos que nos acompañan por streaming, como él va a hablar en inglés, recuerden que pueden activar los subtítulos para que puedan seguir las cosas que él está hablando. Él prefiere no utilizar el traductor, entonces yo voy a estar colaborando aquí con cualquier cosa relacionada con la traducción. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Gracias. Now, I'm glad to be here. Nice to see everybody. What do you think of the title of my talk? Scientists like B.F. Skinner get anything wrong? Well, he got a few things wrong, but I'm going to also tell you about things that he got right. And what we're going to be talking about is conditioning and learning. And just by way of review, there are two basic forms of conditioning and learning. There's a classical or Pavlovian conditioning, and that's my specialty. And there's operant or instrumental conditioning, which is B.F. Skinner's specialty. And that might begin to tell you what he got right and what he got wrong. This is B.F. Skinner's distinction between classical and operant, Pavlovian and operant conditioning. And what's, I think, worth reflecting on a little bit is that Skinner made this distinction between operant conditioning and Pavlovian conditioning way back more than 70 years, about 70 years ago. That's even, well, no, it's not older than I am. I'm older than 70. But it's a long time ago. It's before any of you were born, and it's probably before any of your parents were born. And this was a distinction that he made in his book, Science and Human Behavior, 1953, which then became the introductory psychology book for teaching introductory psychology at Harvard University. Harvard is not quite as famous yet as Konrad Lorenz, but it's starting to catch up. One of the distinctions Skinner made is the kinds of behavior that are subject to change by a learning procedure. Operant conditioning targets operant behavior, which is said to be different from respondent behavior. And Skinner thought that Pavlovian condition only worked for respondent behavior. Operant behavior involves skeletal muscles, whereas respondent behavior involves smooth and glandular responses and muscles, like salivation. Operant conditioning generally involves interacting with the outside world, the external environment, whereas Pavlovian conditioning, according to this original Skinnerian view, involved just regulations of the internal environment and the physiology of the organism. Skinner suggested that operant behavior was emitted, whereas Pavlovian conditioning was elicited. And of course, Skinner made a claim over and over again that operant conditioning and operant behavior is very interesting, whereas Pavlovian conditioning and respondent behavior is not at all interesting. And the reason that I talk about this is not because these distinctions are no longer as easy to justify as they were back in 1953. The reason I talk about this is that people in the applied behavioral analysis and people working and studying the experimental analysis of behavior, in large measure continue to follow these distinctions. How many of you have seen these distinctions in your classes? I mean, anybody? Yeah, there you go. Well, I'm going to straighten you out. Okay, so what did Skinner get right? Well, he mostly got right things about instrumental conditioning. One of the things that he got right was the concept of shaping. How many of you have heard about the concept of shaping? Yeah, shaping is a hugely important process for applied behavioral analysis. And everybody knows the definition of shaping, right? It's the reinforcement of successive approximations to it's a real challenge to figure out exactly how to do it. And the other thing that's really interesting about shaping, I can see we're going to be here a long time, because I'm telling you things that are not on the slide. The other thing that's interesting about shaping, despite its critical importance in applied behavioral analysis, there's virtually no research on it. You try to find experiments that are done in the last 20 years on shaping. It's very difficult to find. But he was on the right track about shaping. Schedules of reinforcement, he invented that, and he was a master at it. And we continue to study schedules of reinforcement. And in contrast to shaping, there's a lot of contemporary research, and we know a great deal about the mechanics of schedules of reinforcement. And of course, he was very enthusiastic about educational and training applications, and he was right on the money about that. He was right on target about that. And the other thing that's interesting about his interest in shaping in educational applications is that they required technology which wasn't available during the 1950s, but is available now. So a lot of technological applications in educational situations are actually carrying out Skinner's program of applying operant conditioning principles to education. And of course, he stimulated the foundation of applied behavior analysis, which has turned out to be a huge benefit to mankind. So there was a lot of things he got right. Okay. What did he get wrong? Well, he got wrong virtually everything about Pavlovian conditioning. And everybody else has followed in his footsteps. How many of you seen a diagram of Pavlovian conditioning and it looks like this? Even people in the upstairs, even in the last row, in the back row of the auditorium, people have seen this diagram. What you may not have seen is an article I wrote which was called "What's Wrong with This Picture?" showing exactly this picture, and the answer was just about everything. This mischaracterizes Pavlovian conditioning in virtually every respect. For one thing, it describes that in Pavlov's laboratory, When they introduced the conditioning procedure, they presented food paired with a bell, and that resulted in the bell eliciting a conditioned salivary response. And here is the kicker. Pavlov never rang a bell in his lab. So this is a misconception that has been passed along for over 100 years that we continue to pass along. Why did that happen? Well, because Pavlov didn't know English. And there is a lesson in this for all of you. You need to learn English, and you need to be very good at English so that you can describe your work accurately in English so people won't misrepresent it. If you write all your scientific findings in Russian, is anybody going to try to do that? No hands on that one. You're a little better off if you write it in Spanish, but Russian was kind of far. They translated a lot of Pavlov's work, and we spent years kind of catching up on correcting those impressions, including this silly story about a bell. The other thing you get from this particular diagram is that Pavlovian conditioning had to do with salivation and conditioned salivation. Now, how many of you have ever, you guys probably, your parents are investing in your education, right? And for some of your parents, it's a big sacrifice. And so you go home on the weekend, and your mom and dad, your mother and father will ask you, well, so what did my tuition dollars buy me this week? What did you learn this week? And you say, oh, Mom, hey, there's a really cool thing. Dogs will salivate in response to a bell. And so your mother's, that's what I'm sending you to college for? So the notion that Pavlovian conditioning has to do with salivation really understates. It misrepresents and understates the significance of this type of learning. And Pavlov knew that. Pavlov wasn't studying salivation to understand salivation. He wasn't interested in salivation. He was interested in plasticity of the brain. He was interested in how the nervous system gets reorganized during the course of learning. And salivary conditioning was just a vehicle to address those kinds of questions. But people forgot the question and just focused, and Skinner wasn't interested in the question anyway. One of the things that really pissed me off, I guess that's not a right thing to say. How does that come across in translation? One of the things, the translator walked out. He said, I've had enough of this. One of the things that got me really annoyed is that in this book, Science and Human Behavior, Skinner actually recounted a portion of a novel that he read, which made fun of Pavlov's work and made fun of Pavlov as being concerned with studying the spittle of dogs. Well, it's a lot more than the spittle of dogs. And all right, so what is it about? Well, one of the things that Skinner, one of the things that Skinner was totally wrong about is this notion that Pavlovian conditioning has to do with smooth muscles, glandular responses, and physiological responses. Well, that's true, but Pavlovian conditioning has to do with a lot of other stuff, and because it does, it's pretty interesting and it's highly relevant. And one line of work that moved us in that direction is the discovery of the phenomenon, what was originally called auto-shaping and is now referred to as sign tracking. This was discovered by Brown and Jenkins actually got his PhD at Harvard University and knew Skinner personally. And he assigned a student, Paul Brown. He said, get me a bunch of pigeons that have been shaped to peck a response key for food reinforcement. And once you get these pigeons shaped up to peck the key, we're ready to do their experiment. So this was considered a preliminary and uninteresting phase of the experiment. Well, Paul Brown, I never knew Paul Brown. I don't know what kind of a person he was, but he might have been a little bit lazy. So he turned on the key light for 10 seconds and then automatically provided grain to the birds. Now, if you were shaping the pigeon's key peck, you're only supposed to feed the bird when he's getting close to the key, right? And he has to approach and make successive approximations to getting close to touching the key and then actually pecking the key. Well, Paul Brown says, I got too much to do. I don't have time for this. So I'm just going to turn on this key light. He programmed the equipment to do it automatically. At the end of 10 seconds, pigeons are going to get food. And I'm going to go out to lunch and come back and see what happens. Well, he went out to lunch, came back, and all the pigeons were pecking the key. And that's why they call this auto-shaping, automatic shaping. But it had nothing to do with shaping. Jenkins became really interested in this and studied it in various ways. And this was actually one of the first experiments led to the development of behavior systems. The key light becomes associated with food. And furthermore, they peck things that are relatively small and bright, like grains of food on the ground. And so that pecking behavior comes to be directed at the key light, and boom, you have what's actually a Pavlovian conditioned response, and it's not a glandular response. It's a skeletal pecking behavior. Furthermore, it's exactly the behavior that Skinner used to develop all his work on schedules of reinforcement. That was all pigeons pecking keys. So here we've got the textbook example of an operant response that's supposed to be interesting and relevant and skeletal behavior and so forth. All those characters is operant behavior. And it's being produced by a Pavlovian procedure. Pretty revolutionary, don't you think? And if you were now this came out in 1968. That's only 15 years after publication of Science and Human Behavior in 1953. It came out in 1968 when Skinner was still very active, but he was active trying to sell his ideas on TV shows late at night and stuff like that. And in the newspaper article, he wasn't doing science anymore. He was doing selling of science. And so he didn't pay attention to this thing, but some of his friends and colleagues did pay attention to it, and they said, well, this can't be right. You can't have Pavlovian conditioning of keepeks. That's just wrong. It's wrong. It's against all the things that Skinner told us about Pavlovian conditioning. It must be a form of operant behavior. But what would make it a form of operant behavior? Well, if the pigeon pecked a key, the food automatically showed up for him. So even though the pecks were not necessary to produce the food, the pecks were followed by food. And Skinner told us that even if there isn't a causal relationship between an operant response and a reinforcer, you can get superstitious behavior, and you're actually shaping up an operant response. Well, that seems like a reasonable explanation. It seems particularly, sensible if you don't want to give up the notion that keepeks are operant and cannot be modified by Pavlovian procedures. So people started to test that idea, and the way they tested it, this was an experiment was done at the University of Pennsylvania, in which they modified the procedure so that the key light was followed by food, but if the pigeon pecked, it cut short that sequence. So on trials when the pigeon pecked, the key light did not get followed by food. Well, if the pecks are actually canceling out the food, there's no way the food can superstitiously reinforce the pecking behavior. So any pecking behavior that develops with this procedure, which is called the omission control procedure, any pecking behavior that develops here cannot possibly be explained by adventitious or superstitious operant conditioning. And what you see on the bottom, and this was published in a Science magazine, which rarely publishes work on behavioral conditioning, but they published this paper, and these are individual pigeons, and it shows the cumulative acquisition of pecking behavior. And you can see some of the birds are learning very strong pecking responses under this omission control procedure. And there are a few birds like this guy over here that doesn't get, some of these don't get quite up high, but you can produce key peck conditioning with an omission control procedure. So an explanation of this in terms of operant conditioning principles is not possible. Well, subsequently, the sign tracking phenomenon has been pursued in lots of different situations, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a real powerful response. We did quite a bit of this work in a sexual conditioning paradigm, entirely Pavlovian procedures. A male bird is given a signal that a female is about to be released. Once the association is formed, and the male runs over to the signal, which is indicated by that red star. So you get sign tracking in a sexual conditioning situation. This shows that this phenomenon develops when there is a lot of space, a lot of room for the bird to go elsewhere. These experimental chambers are more than a meter on a side, much bigger than your standard Skinner box. And the omission control procedure doesn't block learning under these circumstances. And the other thing that's real interesting is if you start out with a conditioned stimulus located on the left here near the female door, as it was in the original slide, and after they approach the signal, you move the signal to other places where the signal had never appeared during training. The birds will follow the signal no matter where you put it. You can put it on a back wall and they'll approach that. And we were interested in how far you could push this thing following an experiment that Jenkins did, which is called the long box experiment, in which the key light was 91 centimeters from the food dish, and even separating the key light from the food dish by this distance, the bird approaches and pecks the key light. And because of the long distance, and the key light's only on for like 6 or 8 seconds, sometimes the bird doesn't get back to the food cup in time to pick up the food that's there. So you can get this kind of sign tracking with this a significant separation between the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus. You know that everything is bigger in Texas, right? Did anybody hear that expression? Hey, yeah, you heard that expression. Everything is big, except me. I've been in Texas for 50 years, and I haven't grown at all in all of that time. Well, anyway, when we did the long box experiment with that 91 centimeters, we thought that was kind of wimpy. If we're going to do a long box, we're going to make the box 244 centimeters long. And even under these circumstances, you put the signal on the opposite side from where the female is going to appear, and the male runs to the signal. So sign tracking is a hugely powerful phenomenon. It violates every rule about Pavlovian conditioning that Skinner and his followers have popularized, and it's highly significant. And the reason it's highly significant is that what's happening here is that you've got a signal for an unconditioned stimulus that is highly desirable. And the signal becomes associated with the unconditioned stimulus. The signal itself becomes desirable. The signal itself becomes desirable, and it drives behavior. It drives behavior towards the signal. And the behavior it drives is not, it's a lot more than salivation. It's actual running over there. And if you made him so that he has to open a door and whatever, he would do all those things. It has turned out that individuals who have a propensity to sign track are more apt to fall into drug addiction. Because in drug addiction, you have signals that become associated with a desirable drug state. The individuals become so enamored or so triggered by the signal that it generates all kinds of other behavior to get you close to that signal and presumably close to the unconditioned stimulus. And so there's a lot of important new work on the neurobiology of addiction that is based on this phenomenon of sign tracking. Okay. So how are we doing for time? We're good. How good are we? Is what we have left? 30 minutes left. Okay. You guys up for 30 more minutes? You are. I don't know. Okay, so let's So I've already told you the first three of these things about the significance of sign tracking. Let's talk about the last one. The last one is it solves the problem of misbehavior. How many of you are worried about the problem of misbehavior? Nobody's worried about that. We only have one person worried about it. Well, if nobody's worried about it, why should I be worried about it? Well, actually, I worried about it a lot because this is one way in which behavior systems has reared its ugly head and showed its relevance in interpreting conditioning effects. But if you haven't been worried about it, we can move on to this thing, which is another part of. I think this is really important, and this is part of the future in applied behavior analysis. In fact, I think it's so important that I'm thinking about writing a paper about it, but I haven't. But it's going to take a little bit of work. And I'm too busy traveling around the world to write papers. So if I don't get this paper written, it's all your fault. This illustrates, it's a diagram that you've probably all seen. Have you all seen this diagram? You haven't all, man, where have you been? You have seen the map. This is actually discussed in chapter 7 of, I don't know what that book is, but I was talking to, she left. She wasn't interested in misbehavior either, but anyway, she was telling me that she has a dog just like that. But anyway, this illustrates the key factors or components of an instrumental conditioning situation. And Skinner recognized this. He recognized that, there's an instrumental response, which is followed by, here we call it the response outcome. Skinner called it a reinforcer. And all of this takes place in the presence of a certain cues designated by capital S. So there are three primarily components of an instrumental conditioning situation. And Skinner talked about these same three things. He talked about it a little bit differently than we do in contemporary analyses of instrumental behavior. In contemporary analyses, we talk about associations that get formed between these various components. And there is a series of different associations that become established. One is the SR association between stimulus S and the response R. Then because the response is followed by the reinforcer, stimulus S gets paired with the reinforcer, which then allows for the formation of an SO association. There's also evidence for an RO association, and for those of you who would like to have a headache early, there's the hierarchical SRO. It's a little bit more complex. Anyway, there is a series of associations that we now know, based on contemporary research, are learned as a consequence of instrumental conditioning. The one that I'm going to talk about, emphasize here, is the SO association. Why am I going to talk about the SO association? This is actually, people talk about Pavlovian and instrumental conditioning as two different things. Well, they are two different things procedurally, and Skinner talked about them as two different types of conditioning, but you cannot separate Pavlovian from instrumental conditioning. And the SO association is the reason why. Every instrumental conditioning or operant conditioning situation is going to allow for the formation of an SO association. That is fundamentally a Pavlovian association. It's like a conditioned stimulus, S, associated with an unconditioned stimulus, O. And you get a Pavlovian association, what is the consequence of that? Well, one consequence is you're going to approach stimulus S. Another consequence is that the presentation of stimulus S is going to activate the memory of the reinforcer. And activating the memory of the reinforcer is going to motivate action, motivate behavior relevant to obtaining that reinforcer. So the SO association is highly relevant to instrumental behavior. And this association was never discussed by Skinner, but I'll take that back in a minute. This association is not discussed in contemporary textbooks on applied behavior analysis. And I think applied behavior analysis is missing out on a significant phenomenon that they could put to use. Now, I broke the machine. So how do we know that there is an SO association? Well, this is how SO associations are studied in contemporary research. And these are of great interest in individuals trying to understand neurobiology of addiction. SO associations play a major role in that, and this is the experimental design they use, and I'll review that in a minute. But before that, I'm sorry, the top of this slide got cut off, and the top of the slide was the best part. This is an article that was written by William Estes and B.F. Skinner and published in 1941 in the Journal of Experimental Psychology. So this was a collaborative venture. Skinner did this experiment. And what, I'm sorry, the slide got cut off like that. What they were interested in is the effect of anxiety on instrumental behavior. So they had rats pressing a bar for food on a variable interval schedule. Periodically, a variable interval schedule will produce I should do it the other way, the way you guys see it. It's going to produce a really steady, nice cumulative record, right? You've all seen cumulative records of a variable interval schedule. If you haven't seen that, your life has not been complete. So you need to look this up. So you get steady food-motivated responding of an operant response. Now, periodically, during the performance of this food-seeking behavior, they presented a tone followed by shock. And that was a Pavlovian thing. That was just a pure CS-US pairing. And they looked to see what is the effect of a Pavlovian stimulus on the rate of lever pressing for food. So the slide doesn't do it justice. I apologize for that. And if you if you demand your money back for this lecture, I wouldn't blame you. Okay, so here are the actual data. This is from Estes and Skinner, 1941. Here is that beautiful variable interval cumulative record. And the first plot is early in the tone shock pairings. So early in the tone shock pairings, the tone comes on at this point, and the rat kind of continues to press the bar. He gets shocked, he continues pressing the bar. The second trial, tone comes on, the rat's not quite so sure. The third trial, tone comes on, and he said, I'm not pressing this bar, man. So you get a total suppression of bar pressing, and then he picks up after that. So what is this showing you? Well, for one thing, the tone shock pairing is like an SO. It's a Pavlovian pairing. And it's showing you that an SO type association is having a major impact on the rate of instrumental behavior. So this is Skinner's own experiment, which he totally ignored in all subsequent writings about Pavlovian conditioning. So he ignored his own data. So how do we test for SO associations in contemporary neurobiological research? Well, we use what actually neurobiologists have termed the Pavlovian instrumental transfer experiment. We knew this under a different term when only learning psychologists studied this phenomenon. But they called it Pavlovian instrumental transfer, and that's exactly what it is, and that word has stuck ever since. So what this involves is a phase of instrumental conditioning. That's routine, that kind of lever pressing for food. And then you have a phase of Pavlovian conditioning, where the CS comes to elicit the reward expectancy. So the phase of Pavlovian conditioning is designed to independently create an SO association. And then to see if this SO association affects instrumental behavior, you have a transfer phase. Well, you then test how the conditioned stimulus changes the rate of instrumental behavior. And if the reward expectancy is compatible with the reinforcer in the operant procedure, the CS should increase the rate of the instrumental response. If they're incompatible, it should have the opposite effect, and that's how these things turn out. So here's a more concrete example of a transfer of training design. Phase of instrumental conditioning, you're lever pressing for food, and the experimental context comes to activate expectancy of food. Then you have a phase of Pavlovian conditioning. For this phase, the lever is not there. It's just Pavlovian. So a tone is followed by free food that's presented irrespective of what the rat is doing. The lever is not there. And then you do a transfer phase. Present a tone during the lever press. During lever pressing for food, and what you see is an elevation in the rate of lever pressing for food. If you do if you do an experiment where the Pavlovian expectancies are incompatible with the operant reinforcer, you get a different effect. Here you have lever pressing for food, and then you do tone shock pairings, then you present the tone while the subjects are pressing the lever for food, and you get a suppression of lever pressing. That was the S.T. Skinner experiment, and that led to the invention of the procedure that we now call it the conditioned suppression procedure, which is a major technique for the study of conditioned fear. And what conditioned suppression shows you is that fear isn't just a glandular Pavlovian thing. That fear influences how you interact with the world. Your willingness to go out and try to obtain food, fear shuts that down. So these Pavlovian conditioned responses have a major effect on operant behavior. And so, in summary, why is SO important? Y'all like summary slides? What this means is time to wake up, guys. It's almost over. If you've had a hard time, if you wish this guy from Texas, who's way too short to be a Texan, would quit talking, You'll have your wish. So that the SO association is learned, and this is the kicker this is what kicks Skinner in the butt. The SO association is learned in all operant or instrumental conditioning procedures. You cannot get away from it. The SO association is basically Pavlovian, so no matter how much Skinner can argue about the irrelevance of Pavlovian conditioning, he can't rule it out of his experiments. And the headache that the Skinnerians would have if they allowed themselves to have is to look at how many of the schedule of reinforcement effects that Skinner and Förster and Skinner identified are actually reflections of this SO. I mean, one of the things that a major effect in schedules of reinforcement is the fixed interval scallop, right? How many of you heard about the fixed interval scallop? How many of you ate one of those scallops? No. Well, the fixed interval scallop is probably an SO based on temporal cues. Anyway, those are issues that they're not quite ready to even start to think about. But the SO puts Pavlovian conditioning at the center of the analysis of goal-directed behavior. And Pavlovian instrumental transfer designs provide critical evidence and an opportunity for a new technique for modifying instrumental behavior for folks in the applied behavior analysis. So what did Skinner get right and what he got wrong? Most of what Skinner got right concerned operant conditioning. Most of what Skinner got wrong concerned Pavlovian conditioning. One cannot be divorced from the other, and recognizing the role of Pavlovian learning in operant conditioning can provide new tools for applied behavior analysis. And I'm way too old to take advantage of this brilliant idea that I had. But you guys are not that old. You could pursue this. This would be really cool. And let me end with this, which previews a little bit of what I'm going to talk about tomorrow, provided they let me back in here. Oh, that guy's got way too many jokes, and they're not any good. But if they do let me back in here tomorrow, I'm going to talk about why we are in the golden age of behaviorism. And one reason we are is that it's easier now than ever before to monitor and record behavior. Businesses are now obsessed with monitoring and recording behavior. You know what constitutes a successful phone app? Everybody's interested in making the next phone app that's going to turn them into billionaires. How many of you are going to make the next phone app that's going to make you a billionaire and you can come back and just buy all of Konrad Lorenz? None of you are thinking about doing that? Well, if you did that, the criterion for a successful phone app is what? It's a number of It's not just the number of downloads. It's the amount of time you spend on that app and how many things you click that are in that app. And they keep track of that. They keep track of exactly how many times you visit this app, exactly how many times you click on one part of it as opposed to another. And if you click on one part of it more than another, they move the one that's ignored to a different location. They're tracking your behavior in much more detail than your mom or dad could ever possibly hope to. But actually, your mom and dad are now able to track your behavior as well because of your phone. There are lots of other things in your phone that are collecting data. My phone tells me that I'm too lazy and I don't walk enough. And then And then if I tell my phone, to hell with you, I'm walk as much as I feel like, and you can just shut up. If I complain about it, then they talk about the asymmetry in my gait. How many of you have ever thought about doing an experiment that focuses on the asymmetry of someone's walking behavior? You couldn't do such an experiment 10 years ago because we didn't have ways of detecting that in an easy fashion. Now we do. It's not just the asymmetry in your gait, it's how big your gait is. You know, whether you take small steps or big steps, and on and on and on. And I just hate my phone. I don't want my phone to get in my business. I know if my wife complains I don't walk fast enough, that's bad enough. But to have my phone complain about that, come on. Anyway, there's automated monitoring behavior that's now possible in ways that it's just phenomenal. And of course, there's increased use of technology in the classroom and emergence of online instruction. And online instruction, the basic elements of online instruction, all have their roots in Skinner's teaching machine, which is now in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. You don't need to go to the Smithsonian. You can just log into an online class and experience many of the principles that Skinner talked about. So he was pretty clever in his foresight, but he wasn't clever enough for me. I wish he had been a little more clever about Pavlovian conditioning. Well, thanks very much, folks. Appreciate your patience and your good humor in laughing at bad jokes.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Tenemos tiempo para algunas preguntas. ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta, algo que quisiera profundizar? Mientras van calentando. Allá y ¿cómo llegamos allá? No, prefiere que no. Yo le traduzco la pregunta. O, sí, dila a ver si alcanza a escuchar.
¿Cómo cree que el sesgo histórico contra el comportamiento ha podido sobre el aprendizaje?
Voy a hacer la primera parte y después me empieza la segunda. How the historic bias against Pavlovian conditioning has modulated the learning views now. ¿Y la segunda parte?
¿Y qué metodologías innovadoras podría proponer para cerrar la brecha entre el condicionamiento operativo en futuras investigaciones?
And how would you think novel procedures or methodologies to connect more the research between Pavlovian and instrumental conditioning?
Well, the answer to the first question. What was funny about that? The answer to the first question is pretty straightforward. I think this bias in how operant conditioners and people in applied behavior analysis, the bias of how they look at Pavlovian conditioning is just limited their perspective and limited the kinds of progress they can make. I mean, it's been sort of self-defeating. I mean, there's been no advantage whatsoever to it. I can't see any advantage. I wasn't quite sure about the next question.
The second one is how can you improve methodology to connect Pavlovian and instrumental conditioning?
Well, how can we improve the methodology to connect the two? Well, I think the first thing you have to do is to acknowledge the importance of these SO associations. That's number one. Number two is you have to start doing things like a transfer of control experiment, where you do explicit Pavlovian training in order to modify some instrumental response. I mean, people often look for ways of discouraging behavior. How do you discourage behavior? Well, just do fear conditioning. You don't have to do punishment. You know, in a punishment procedure, if you do something that is undesired, you get an aversive stimulus. Well, you don't have to program a punishment. You don't have to program things that are related to behavior to change behavior. I mean, one of my favorite things, I got 2 dogs at home. What they are keeps changing. This is not always the same 2 dogs, but you let them out and you want them to come back. So how do you train them to come back? Well, Skinner will tell you, you shape him, you know, he gets closer and closer, you give him food and like that. That's not how I train my dogs to come back. I blow a whistle and drop a piece of food right in front of me. Pavlovian procedure, whistle, drop a piece of food. The next time they're running around in the yard, I blow the whistle. What do you think they do? They come running into the house. So you can train these instrumental responses without any shaping, without, I mean, it's difficult to apply response reinforcement contingencies. Pavlovian procedures are way easier to apply or to carry out because you can ignore the subject's behavior during the training phase. And I think if we start thinking more carefully about this, we're going to be coming up with all kinds of interesting applications. There were some hands over here. Oh, there's some back here.
En su artículo menciona que el concepto de comportamiento emitido surgió para justificar la diferencia entre el condicionamiento operante y el pavloviano, pero usted argumenta que esta distinción ha perdido su utilidad en la investigación contemporánea. ¿Cómo cree que esta reinterpretación del comportamiento impactará el desarrollo de futuras teorías?
So, the concept of elicited behavior. It was originally proposed to make the distinction between operant and Pavlovian learning. But that distinction has been diluted by current research. What are you think that are the implications of that dilution for future research?
Well, I think the distinction between elicited and emitted behavior is just not tenable anymore. In fact, I wrote a paper specifically on that subject. We should give up that distinction altogether. Now, I'm not sure that we need to totally abandon it. There are certainly, if you look at there are reflexes. I mean, the big one is the patellar knee-jerk reflex. You hit your leg just below the knee at the right spot, and your leg will kick out, and that's a reflex. I mean, you don't see it when your leg has to be freely moving and so on. So, but there are definitely reflexes, right? And how they fit into this, we need to define more clearly what we mean by a reflex and what we and under what circumstances or behaviors that don't have those reflexive properties. I think that approach is going to be more in tune with modern neuroscience, it's going to be more apt to be productive than just notion of emitted versus elicited. Emitted suggests that it comes out of thin air. Well, nothing comes out of thin air. So the whole notion of emitted, oh, I just felt like doing this. And we often say that, you know, why are you doing it? I just felt like doing that. But if you go into details about, well, why did you feel like doing it right this moment and all of that sort of thing, you discovered that there are antecedent stimuli that actually cause the behavior and so forth. Emitted makes it sound like it comes out of thin air. And that's not a scientific concept of behavior. So I think it's time to give that one up. It was time to give that up long ago. and Sapolsky wrote a 600-page book, more than 600 pages, explaining it much better than I can as to why it's time to give that up. I hope that's helped. I'm not sure.
Por allí.
La pregunta que le tenemos a Domjan es cómo estos enfoques pues, del condicionamiento podrían influir tanto en la educación como en los diseños del programa de aprendizaje, básicamente como esos desafíos a futuro.
How do you see the advances in conditioning to have an effect in future education and the programming of the education programs?
Well, education has become very sophisticated, often because we are now in a position to measure a lot more things that students do in a highly detailed fashion. And so I don't think basic research in operant and Pavlovian conditioning is going to help very much. I think basic research on conditioning gives us a way of thinking about problems, but we need to take that conceptual framework and move it into doing experiments on educational strategies. I think you can't do pigeon experiments and have it create an important solution to college education. I think we're beyond that point. You can take the way that you approach behavior from a behavioristic conditioning perspective and then design more effective educational research, and you have to do research on what educational strategies work and which ones don't. Too often, new techniques that are applied in education are only applied because now we can do these things, and so let's do them. That's not a good reason for doing them. I mean, at the University of Texas, we use a instructional software package called Canvas. I don't know if you guys, you don't use Canvas down here, probably. Oh, you do? Canvas is written by, and most educational software systems are written by software engineers. And they're not psychologists. They don't know learning. And I wish they would quit messing with it, because they keep putting stuff into these software packages just because they can and they think it'd be really cute. I think it's a bloody nightmare and I hate it. I mean, and now I can specify that an assignment is gonna be due at 10:47 on a Friday night. Now, what possible useful purpose does that satisfy? I mean, and I can see how many minutes the students have delayed or turned in their paper 37 minutes late, 41 minutes late. I don't care. Don't give me that information. It has no educational purpose. So there is a lot of that kind of stuff that is being written into these software packages that don't have a psychological basis. So I think it's time for psychologists and educational psychologists to reclaim the machinery of education instead of letting software engineers run amok with it. And if you want me to hear me rant and rave about that for another 30 minutes, I would be happy to. I hate that stuff.
You're not the only one.
Bueno, la pregunta es, ¿cómo crees que la eliminación de la distinción entre comportamiento elicitado y emitido podría influir en el diseño de futuros experimentos en psicología del comportamiento, especialmente en el estudio de la relación entre condicionamiento clásico y operante?
So, do you have another example in how if we stop having the distinction between operant and Pavlovian behavior with other types of advances to understand learning in general?
I'm too old to come up with solutions to things. That's your job. No, I don't have an answer to these things, but I think these are really important issues to think about. How do you like that for a cop-out?
Ok. Mira, la pregunta es la siguiente. Personalmente, ¿qué parte de la creciente industria posmoderna cree usted que sacará mayor provecho al punto 3 allí mencionado y por qué? Al punto 3 allí mencionado.
If we were to advance in the third point, what kind of business, modern business, is going to be improved or going to be more profitable?
They are already doing these things. And that's why we have multi-billionaires. It used to be a major accomplishment to become a billionaire. Now you're just one of a crowd of people. Now in order to distinguish yourself, you have to have $100 billion or $200 billion. And now we have people like that. You know who one of them is? Is Jeff Bezos, who founded Amazon. You know what allows Jeff Bezos to make so much money on Amazon? It was conditioning principles. When first it has to do with the design of the web page where you go to order stuff. They don't let you order stuff. You show an interest in this thing, and they swamp you with 12 other things that are, oh, this is a lot better, and it'll cost more, and you can do more stuff. And where do you think that comes from? And the big one, of course, is reinforcement. What's reinforcement for buying something at Amazon? For even going to shop at Amazon. What's reinforcement number one? The first reinforcer I get when I go on Amazon is what? They have what you're looking for. Now you can go to a local store. No place you're going to go to in Bogota, no place you're going to go to in Los Angeles has all this stuff. And you can be looking for the most esoteric things. You go to Amazon and they have 12 of them. So that's the first reinforcer. What does that encourage you to do? Next time you're looking for something you're not sure where to buy, you check at Amazon first, right? So they got you there, and then you buy the thing. What do you want to have happen when you buy it? You want it at your doorstep, even if it's something that you don't need. Most of what you buy, you don't need. Anyway, most of what my wife buys, we don't need. But if you buy it, you want it there tomorrow. And their delivery system is unparalleled. So much so that they've become an envy of the industry. Everybody is trying to do it as well as Amazon does it. What's that? You want it there as soon as possible. What is that? That's immediate reinforcement, and that's something that Skinner talked a lot about and that he was totally right about. So successful businesses, take your iPhone. I don't have my iPhone. Somebody took my iPhone. I told her, take my iPhone. I said, oh, gladly. She'll be back. And I'll have my... Anyway. No, I don't. I hate my iPhone for the same reason I hate Canvas. But the iPhone was built similarly under the guidance of conditioning principles. I mean, what you want to do, if you want to become the next billionaire, you want to create a product that everybody is going to be unwilling to live without. And the iPhone iPhone or a smartphone like that, all the copies, the Galaxy and so forth, those are copies of the iPhone. iPhone started the whole craze, and now people cannot live without their iPhones, which means that you're willing to pay out $1,500 for a damn iPhone. I mean, the price has become just incredibly high. I used to be able to buy a phone for $30, a flip phone thing, you can't buy a phone for $30 anymore. You can't buy a flip phone. It's got to be a smartphone. I used to think I'm smarter than, I don't need a phone that's going to be smarter than me, but now we can't live without phones that are smarter than we are. It became a necessity, and what's really interesting about it is, at least in the United States, probably not so much here in Bogota, is everybody's got a smartphone, no matter how limited their income is. They may not be able to buy food for the weekend, but they got their phone. And they wouldn't live without their phone, but they will skip dinner. And that's all because of conditioning principles. So they've got us by the short hairs already. Yes? Well, I don't know.
La pregunta que planteamos mi grupo fue: ¿qué implicaciones tiene abandonar la clasificación emitido versus elicitado para las terapias de tercera generación que soportan la existencia de ambos tipos de respuesta, producto de diferentes condicionamientos?
¿Las consecuencias de eso para las terapias de tercera generación? Okay. Are you familiar with the third generation clinical psychology therapies? Entonces esa sería la pregunta, porque como él no trabaja tanto en clínica, entonces no mucho. So because he's asking, what are the consequences of putting more in the front Pavlovian conditioning for the current therapies of psychology?
Oh, I mean, somebody's already done that. Clinical psychology has been much more receptive. They've been much more interested in Pavlovian processes than Skinnerian operant people for a long time. I mean, going back all the way to, the original Little Albert experiment, and how does Little Albert acquire fear of a white rabbit and white fur and things like that. And so the most widely accepted theory of the acquisition of fears and phobias is Pavlovian conditioning. And anxiety and fears and phobias account for a large proportion of the psychological discomfort that people have and that problems that people seek therapy for. And the best approach to solving those problems is with behavior. They call it cognitive behavior therapy, which is basically an extinction style procedure, which is founded in basic conditioning work. So Pavlovian conditioning has been an integral part of clinical psychology for many decades, and they continue to pay real close attention to what's happening in Pavlovian conditioning because of that. And there's a lot of interest in ways of trying to improve exposure-based therapies based on contemporary work on extinction of fear in the laboratory. So that integration has been much more a central part of the field than Pavlovian things with applied behavior analysis.
En un artículo usted hace una crítica a los términos emitido y elicitado, siendo términos tautológicos, que llevan a explicaciones circulares y vagamente definidas, siendo que ambas pueden sobreponerse aun si no hacen parte de su respectivo sistema de condicionamiento. En su lugar, usted propone el término evocar para superar esa ambigüedad. ¿De qué forma nos ayudaría a entender mejor la conducta y el aprendizaje?
So he says in one of your papers, you criticize elicitate and elicitate is as tautological, and that you suggest where to use evoke behavior. How would be that a better concept to capture the behavior related to Pavlovian conditioning?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I don't understand the point of the question.
Sí, probablemente mi traducción. De otra forma, a ver si lo hacemos. O sea, el punto de la pregunta es, ¿en qué sentido?
¿Quieres repetirlo?
Él en un artículo como que dice que el emitido y el término emitido y elicitado se pueden superponer.
¿Cuál es el mejor concepto, según él?
Él como dice como que evocar, pero no sé cómo traduciría eso. Evoke.
Pero entonces evoke, ¿qué pasa con él? ¿Por qué es mejor que elicitado?
O sea, él propone que es mejor usar como otro concepto que aúne esos dos a la vez, el emitido y el elicitado.
Ah, pero no se acuerda del concepto.
Dime.
¿No sabe cuál es el concepto?
No.
Okay, entonces la dejamos para después y lo miramos con
Bueno.
más cuidado. Por aquí.
Si quieren, pasen adelante tuyo, más rápido.
Si juntamos las conductas elicitadas y emitidas en una sola categoría, ¿cómo explicaríamos los casos en los que las respuestas automáticas a ciertos estímulos, por ejemplo los reflejos, son muy diferentes de los comportamientos menos automatizados e inflexibles que dependen de las consecuencias?
How do you distinguish between automatic behavior that is reflexive to immediate behavior that is not reflexive? How can you distinguish that experimentally or conceptually?
Well, I think in many cases they're not distinguishable. The only way to distinguish them clearly, I mean, there are a lot of operant responses that are very quick, very automatic, that occur without awareness, that look exactly like a reflex. There's a lot of that sort of thing. The only way to make that distinction is to go into the nervous system and track out what are the actual neurons involved. And with a purely reflexive act, you have minimally 3 neurons. You may want to add 4 or 5, but you don't have 10,000. It's a very few neurons involved in a pure reflex. And so if you find very automatic responses that require a fairly complex neural system, that's a different kind of thing than a simple reflex. So I guess I could talk about simple reflexes versus complex reflexes, but they're both reflexes.
Listo, muy bien, muchísimas gracias. Las preguntas estuvieron muy interesantes. Realmente han leído algunas de las cosas de él, entonces estuvo muy bien, les agradecemos mucho. Vamos terminando por aquí. Hay un mensaje final que nos van aquí a dar desde la dirección del departamento.
Bueno, muchas gracias al profesor Michael Domjan, a Leonardo, muchas gracias por el espacio. Ahora, para cerrar con broche de oro el día, quiero invitarlos a la celebración del Día del Psicólogo, que se va a realizar justo ahora, bueno, a las 6 de la tarde en cafetería, para que todos ustedes nos acompañen a celebrar esta gran fecha. Muchas gracias. ¿Cómo? ¿De? ¿Para mañana? Es que no tengo el WhatsApp.
Perdón, antes de que nos vayamos, voy a darles una noticia que acaba de salir en redes para quienes tienen clase hoy en la tarde y para los profes que nos acompañan. Vamos a salir ahorita, en la Alameda hay cafecito si quieren, porque está haciendo mucho frío, sabemos. Y las clases de la jornada de la noche están habilitadas para que se den en sincrónico remoto. Si ustedes consideran que el desplazamiento a sus casas va a ser complicado por los temas que hemos tenido estos días, por favor diríjanse para sus casas de la manera más segura posible. Quienes crean que no y que es mejor quedarse aquí y desplazarse más tarde, tienen esa facilidad, pueden quedarse, por supuesto. Mañana los esperamos nuevamente acá quienes nos quieran acompañar en horas de la mañana para seguir escuchando al profesor Domjan. Gracias, nos vemos en un momento en la cafetería. Feliz tarde. ¿Nos tomamos una fotico? Daniel estaba por allá haciéndome la seña. ¿Foto?